Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf chet of Shevuot. Let me share my screen and we will get really started. Um, we are, let's back up and note that in the opening Mishnah of Shavuot, we learned that on Yom Kippur, that Yom Kippur itself as the day and the main Yom Kippur goat offering to Hashem. This is when there was both an offering, one of which would go to Hashem, one goes to La'azazel. And so the offering that's to Hashem, which has its blood sprinkled between the staves of the Aron, toward the paroches from outside from in the Kodesh, from inside the Heichel, and on the golden altar. So it gets sprinkled in those three locations. That's going to atone for the sins of eating Kodesh while Tameh or entering the Beit HaMikdash while Tameh. If one knew he was Tameh, but then forgot and has now remembered. So again, you needed to know you were Tameh, forget about it, and then either eat Kodesh or enter the Beit HaMikdash and not remember that, hey, I did this while Tameh. Because if you do remember when you're Tameh, our Mishnah notes that if and when the person eventually remembers, he's still going to need to bring the special Korban Ola V'Yored. Again, that's the Korban that's discussed beginning of the fifth parek of Vayikra. And in that fifth parak, we saw yesterday that, in fact, it does not very clearly say what violation one did in connection with being tameh. And we had Rebbe and Rava each teach us a Gzeira Shava that indicated that, in fact, one Rebbe taught that it related to the fact that we went into the Beit Hamikdash while Tameh, and Rava taught that it was that in fact it was a Gzeira Shava that of Tumato that taught us that it was referring to the eating of Kodesh. And so as a result, we know that will be subject to a korban ola v'yored, a variable korban depending on the wealth of the giver. And so yesterday we concluded with the Baraisa that explains how we know that the goat offering on Yom Kippur, the goat offering Lashem, atones, or actually really atones is not quite the right word, but rather delays any ramifications of these sins. And how do we know that it's and that it's not something else? And so we had a Baraisa that gave us that details, but it gave us that details in generalities. So today, as we pick up at the end of the sixth line from the bottom of Zion Amabet, the Gemara is going to go through the Baraisa that we quoted yesterday. And so we begin with Amar Mar, end of the sixth to last line on Zion Amabet. Amar Mar, Yeshli v'inyan zeh lahavi gimel tumot. So again, I might have thought that this would be the three tumot: tumat avodah zarah, v'tumat gilui arayos, v'tumat shrichos damim. So we would have thought originally, because the korban laHashem, the goat laHashem that is referenced on Yom Kippur, is specifically about tumot, I might have thought that the tuma that it's referring to are the big three, the three sins of idolatry, improper sexual relations, and murder. So now the question is, so that we end up, of course, in the Brisa saying that that's not the case. We do not apply that. But before we get to that, the Gemara is now trying to understand what was our Hava Amina, because how could it address these three sins? So we're going to take them one by one in context. So, hi avodah zarah hekidami. What is the situation of avodah zarah that we might have thought would get protected from the goat laHashem on Yom Kippur? Because even Mazid, if you did it on purpose, bar katalahu, you would be subject to execution. You don't get off with a simple korban, a communal korban on Yom Kippur. You get executed. And ibashogeg, and if it was accidental, bar korbanhu, you would be subject to offering a korban chatas. You don't get off with a korban for a communal korban on Yom Kippur. So what's the situation? So b'mezid v'lo asrube. Well, it could be that he did it intentionally, but he was never warned, so he can't be subject to execution. Or b'shogeg v'lo isyadale. Or maybe he did it b'shogeg, he did it accidentally. He walked into a room and used the bathroom, didn't realize that the Baal idol was there, and that using the bathroom would be worshiping the idol, and so he ended up worshiping the idol by accident, and he never finds out that he did so. So in all those cases, that's where I might have thought that this sacrifice of the Seir LaHashem, that would come and atone for that, or at least delay any punishment subject to eventually discovering and taking care of the korban, the chatas that you might be subject to, if you remember that, that was a Baal's idol, so therefore I need to offer a korban chatas. So that's case number one. So now the Gemara says, what about Gilui Arayos? As we turn to Ches Amud Aleph, Gilui Arayos nami hechidami. What's the story there? Ibe mezid bar katalahu, ibe shogeg bar karbanahu. Again, the same question. If he did it on purpose, he should be executed, and if he did it by accident, he did it unwittingly and inadvertently, so without realizing that it was prohibited. Obviously, probably knew that he was engaging in the sexual relations, but he didn't realize that it was prohibited. Bar karbanhu, he's subject to bringing a korban. Now, Tosfos here notes when we say bar katalahu, it's not quite true, because not every forbidden union is subject to execution, as we saw over the course of learning Maseches Sanhedrin together. So Gilui Arayos Ibe Mezid bar katalahu, right? So with respect to that question, Tosfos asks, as we take a look at the top Tosfos on Chet Amud Aleph, ubahanach delega katala elakares, that when it comes to the ones that aren't killed but rather have kares, lega ukuma. You can't just say that maybe that's the situation that we're talking about, and therefore those are the ones that you need to have the sacrifice of the Seir LaHashem. Daha ika lemifrach, because we could still ask the same basic question. Bar malkusu, that it's subject to malchus, kedeperishis, as we have been establishing. So the point is, as we've been explaining, so the point is that even though it may be that some of them are subject to execution, that's not the key point. The point is that it's subject to some kind of punishment at the hands of man, and it's that punishment that results in the person's atonement. So why is it necessary to reference the Korban LaHashem and saying that Korban LaHashem, the Seir LaHashem, is somehow going to address the sin of Gilui Arayos? So what's the story? So again, b'mezid v'lo asrube, b'shogeg v'lo isyadale. Same kind of situation as with respect to idolatry. That is, specifically, we're talking about a situation where the person did it intentionally, but nobody ever warned him, and so as a result, he's not subject to execution. And b'shogeg v'lo isyadale, and similarly, if he did it by accident, he didn't know that this person was the sister of his wife. He just thought that this was a random woman, and he hasn't figured it out yet. And so as a result, he's not yet, he doesn't realize that it's a problem yet. And so as a result, that's how he can say, how we can have a situation where you don't have any method of atonement other than this Korban LaHashem. So, shvichus damin nami hechidami. What about murder? How do we understand that? Because ibe mezid bar katalo and ibe shogeg bar galosu. So a slight difference, because a shogeg, when it comes to killing somebody, is not subject to a chatas, but rather goes into exile. And similarly, if the person kills the person intentionally, so then that person is subject to execution. So again, third time and third similar answer. No, b'mezi delo asrule bay. It's again a situation where he was not warned, and therefore, even if he did it on purpose, he's not subject to punishment. Or b'shogeg below is yadale. Or we could say that it's inadvertent and he didn't know that he killed somebody. So that's the situation. Interestingly enough, based on this possibility, the Rishonim all discuss, well, whether or not this implies that if you didn't know and nobody knew, or whether or not this implies something about witnesses, because ordinarily when it comes time for one to be subject to a sin offering, there doesn't need to be any witnesses to your having done the sin that you did inadvertently. But here, when it comes to going into Gullus, you would think that you do need to. So bishogeg velo is yadale seems to suggest that maybe even if you don't have witnesses and you just don't know, and you knew that you were going to that you did it, then you'd have to go into Gullus. There are various ways to try and resolve that issue, but we'll move on because now we have a third possibility. Inami bahanot ala b'nei Gullus ninhu. Or maybe we're dealing with a situation where you don't end up going into Gullus at all. And Rashi tells us that we know about those cases because we just learned Maseches Makos. Harbe shenuyim b'Maseches Makos. We had a bunch of cases in Maseches Makos in the second parak. Because the second parak, remember, all dealt with going into Gullus. Kigon shahargu derech aliyah. So, for example, if you were lifting a big load and then the the rope broke and it fell on somebody, so that would be a situation where it's not even the sufficient liability to go into Gullus. So maybe that's the situation that we're talking about. O mishiyatsa even mitachas yado v'hotzi hala rosho v'kabla. Or if I throw a stone into, along the side of a building, and then somebody unfortunately sticks their head out and the stone hits them and kills them. Well, I was stupid and I shouldn't have done it. But the bottom line is that, I'm not liable enough to go into Gullus in that situation because the person's head wasn't there when I threw the stone. So those situations are situations where, again, there is no possible atonement, from any kind of korban or other punishment. And so as a result, I might have thought that we would have atonement for it through the Seir LaHashem on Yom Kippur. So that explains the Hava Amina. But now let's read the next line so we understand that. So Amar Mar Yachol al Shalosh Tumos Halalu Yehe Seir Mechaper. I might have thought that the goat that goes to Hashem on Yom Kippur, that is sprinkled within the Kodesh HaKodashim and within the Heichal, are going to be atoning for these three sins. So Talmud Lomar mitumos velo kol tumos. So the point is that it says mitumos, from and among the tumot. And so as a result, it's not every tuma, it's just some of them. So mamatzinu shechalak hakasav miklal kol hatumos betumos mikdash v'kodashav. So which of the ones of all of the tumot are the ones that are made distinguished? Well, that's the tuma of the mikdash and of the holy items, meaning eating kodesh while tameh or entering the temple Beis Hamikdash while tameh. So afkan betumas mikdash v'kodashav divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda explains, this is all Rabbi Yehuda speaking. Rabbi Yehuda explains that in fact, because the beirot of entering the temple while tameh or eating kodesh while tameh are distinct. And how are they distinct? They are subject to the korban ola v'yored. They are unique tuma situations that are subject to the korban ola v'yored. And so as a result, when we have this similar situation where we say mitumos, that's from some of the tumot, are what the korban LaHashem, the Seir LaHashem, is going to help atone for on Yom Kippur. So that's it's referring to making the temple tameh and to eating kodesh while tameh. So my chalak. So now the Gemara is going to explain what was that uniqueness. What was the distinction? Demaisi b'olav yored. As I just explained, it's because they are subject to the korban olav yored. Well, 1 second. Now we're going to go through a series of questions and note that, hey, there are other things that the Gemara could say have some kind of distinction. Let's see, how many are we going to do? Or maybe I should have numbered these questions. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 different topics that we're going to note that that maybe they are the distinction, and maybe we should deal with something else. So Ema Avodah Zara, maybe it's Avodah Zara that's unique. Umay Chalak, what's its distinction? So Demaisi Seira Velo Kispa, because when it comes to a sin offering for Avodah Zara, you have to offer it as a she-goat. You cannot offer a kesef, a ewe. So as a result, as Rashi says, Se'ira velo kispa, first of the narrow lines on Chet Amud Aleph, ubishar krisus, but when it comes to other things where you're subject to the kares penalty, it's and you have to bring a chatas because you did it inadvertently. O kispa, o seira. You could do one or the other. You don't have to do just the kispa. So I'm sorry, you don't have to do just the seira. So as a result, maybe that's the uniqueness. So no, not necessarily. Amar Rav Kahana, anan chalak lahakel ka'amrinan. No, the whole point of chalak is to make a distinction that it's got something that is more lenient. Because after all, we're allowing, the whole point of this distinction is that for this sin, we're going to allow the korban lashem to provide some atonement. So v'hai chalak lahakmirhu, and this distinction is a stringency. So it doesn't make sense to be more lenient in one area when you're more stringent in another. So as a result, we have rejected it. So question number 2, Ema yoledes, what about somebody who gives birth? Dechalak demaisi olav yored. So now let's keep a finger in on Rashi. We're now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines down in the Rashi. The Ema yoledes she'im avar aleha yom hakippurim ocheles bekodshim below korban. Maybe first of all, sorry, I should have translated the chalak demaisi olav yored. The sacrifice that a newborn's mother offers after she has finished her period of tumah is dependent on her wealth. And so that is also a korban olav yored. And so maybe I might have thought that in fact, when a mother has a baby and she hasn't yet had a chance to offer a sacrifice, but she is now tahor, and so maybe she could use this offering of the Seir Lashem as her atonement, and she would be now allowed to eat kodshim again, because until she offers her sacrifice, she's not allowed to eat kodshim, even though she's now tahorah. Okay, but Rav Hoshaya says back, no, l'chol chatosam, below l'kol tumosam. No, the problem is that she hasn't done anything wrong. The Torah says, and this is all in the pasuk in Vayikra. Ted Zion, which is this week's Torah portion. So it's a nice Daf Yomi coincidence. So, but it says for all their sins, chatosam, not tumosam, not the tuma, and she hasn't done anything wrong. But 1 second, there's an opinion that says she has done something wrong. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai de Amar Yoledis Nami Chotes He Ma'ikal Meimer. 1 second, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says that she did do something wrong and she is treated as a sinner. So what do you say about that? Well, what was the sin? So the sin is if we take a look back in Rashi, couple lines down in the Rashi, Yoledis Chotasi Shekishe Kora'at liyeled, that when she was in the process of giving birth, when she was bent over to give birth, nishbat shelo tizakek lebala, she swore that she wasn't going to go back to her husband. We assume that out of the pain that she's going through, that she might make such an oath, and that makes her a sinner, and that's why she's actually offering the sin offering. So if that's the case, maybe it is the Chol Chatosam, and maybe this is the thing for which she will be allowed to have some kind of atonement through the Sir Lashem. So Rabbi Shimon Tameh. No, Rabbi Shimon follows his own reasoning. He doesn't use the chalak distinction. He doesn't use the distinction because he's the second opinion in the brisa that we've been quoting. He specifically, because Rabbi Shimon, when we say Rabbi Shimon in the Gemara generally, we are referring to Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. So that Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai is the one who says that we figure out that the goat on Yom Kippur for Hashem specifically atones for Tumah of the temple and the holy things because of the nature of the pasuk itself, because it says Kodesh next to the Tumah. So as a result, that's not going to be a problem. So even according to Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, who says that the woman is a sinner, he doesn't learn it from the same source as Rabbi Yehuda, and therefore it can't be, we're not going to have any problem according to him. So Ema Mitzora. Well, all right. So let's go to the third case. Maybe it's a Mitzora. And again, the Mitzora also has distinct offerings of, and take a look at Ema Mitzora. You know what? Let's take a look at the Rashi before that. The next Rashi, Mimukoma hu muchra, the iu lo tzarich lahach draksha techalak. Again, as we explained, that Rabbi Shimon doesn't require this distinction, the drasha of distinction, and so as a result, we don't need to worry about that. So, Ema Mitzora, what about a Mitzora? The Chalak Didei, Lo Mitzrich La Perusha. That distinction we didn't need to specify. Why not? Daha Parish Gabi Kusha de Yoledes, because we already specified it in connection with a mother of a newborn, because the mother of a newborn has a variable offering. That is also true for a Mitzora. The nature of the offering depends on the person's wealth. And so that's a unique characteristic. Maybe that's the unique characteristic that we're talking about. And that's the one that is getting atonement for the Korban LaHashem. So, Umay Chiluk, Demaisi Ba'ola V'yorei, V'hi Gufa Isa b'Mitzora, and the same Korban Ola V'yorei that we said with respect to the mother is also applies to the Mitzora. So what's our answer? Back into the Gemara. So Amar Rav Hoshia says about middle of the lines in the Gemara. Amar Rav Yoshia is the beginning of a line where there's a little aleph next to it. L'chol chatosam, again, v'lo l'chol tumosam. No, a Mitzora's Korban is not because of a sin, it's because the Mitzora is Tameh, and it's to deal with the Tumah that the issue is. And the Korban LaHashem on Yom Kippur is to deal with sins, not just with Tumah. So Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani da Amar al Shiva Dvarim Nigayin Bahen. But one second, according to Rabbi Shmuel, who says that the Mitzora is an affliction for a sin, maybe in fact that's the point. The person did do a sin, and so as a result, we should have them bring the Korban LaHashem on Yom Kippur should come to atone for that. No, not quite, because Hasam Negia de Ikaperle. No, the whole point is that the tzaras itself constitutes the atonement. The Korban le'ishtaruye bekal, and all the sacrifice is doing is allowing the former Mitzora to go back into the community. So that leads us to our final question, the Ema Nazir Tameh. Maybe it's referring to a Nazir who becomes Tameh. The Chalak Demaisi Torah Muvnei Yona, because that person brings a unique Korban, a unique kind of sin offering of turtle doves or young doves. So Amar Rav Hoshaya again, l'chol chatosam v'lo l'kol tumosam. No, the point is that again, that Nazir who became Tameh, it's not clear that he did a sin, meaning just because he became tamei doesn't mean he did something wrong. Ula Rebbe Allah, one second though. Ula Rebbe Elazar Kapar, de Amar Nazir Nami Chotehu. And well, 1 second, according to Rebbe Elazar Kapar, he says that another is a sinner, and that's why he needs to bring a sin offering, a korban chatas. So Ma'ika Lamemar. So what is there to say in that situation? After all, maybe we could say that the korban of Lashem on Yom Kippur is coming to atone for this sin of becoming a Nazir. And as you may remember, Rabbi Lazar HaKapar says that in fact the sin is the fact that he is not taking pleasure from this world. So now the Gemara Tosfos asks an interesting question here. So let's take a look at the second to last Tosfos on Chet Amud Aleph. Urebi Elazar Hakapar, the Amar Nazir Chotehu, V'im Tomar. So if you want to ask the question, 1 second, I don't understand, Gemara, what you're thinking. V'hal lo ikri chote el lefi shetzir atzmo. What's the reason that he's considered a sinner according to Rebbe Lazar Kapar? It's because he's causing pain for himself and that he's not fully enjoying this world. Min hayayin, because he's withheld from himself the wine. V'asir sa'ir enu balachaper el alatuma. But 1 second, we know that the whole thing that is that the Seir Lashem on Yom Kippur is coming to address is some level of Tuma. It's not the sin of becoming a Nazir, it's the sin of becoming a Tamei Nazir. And that's not a sin, or it's not an absolute prohibition. You just have to start your Nazirus again. V'yesh lomar kevan she'al yedei hatuma balo shetzir atzmo min hayayin pam shniyah. No, but when you become Tameh, you have to restart your Nazirus. So as a result, because you are restarting your Nazirus and you're going to be extending the amount of time for which you are a Nazir, so you are doing more of the sin that Rabbi Elazar HaKapar is specifically worried about. Kida Amar ben Nazir, as we say in Maseches Nazir, Shishana bechata Karinan Bay, that it's as if he came back and sinned again. And so as a result, that's why he needs atonement from his becoming Tameh. So the rest of the Tosfos isn't directly on this point, but is just supportive. But we'll stop there and we'll go back in to the Gemara. So what's the question? So what's the story? The question is, according to Rebbe Lazar Kapar, who says that a Nazir who becomes Tameh is effectively a sinner, why don't we allow that the goat Lashem and say that the goat Lashem on Yom Kippur is coming to atone for that? So, because Savar La Rebbe Shimon, Rebbe Lazar HaKapar agrees with Rebbe Shimon, and to Amar Mimikomo Muchra, that he's the one, according to Rebbe Shimon, is the one who says that we figure it out not from the fact that we have a Tuma and we know that it's some element of Tuma, but it's not every element of Tuma, and therefore we have to figure out which one. It's no, the context itself tells us it's specifically about Tuma in connection with Kodesh. So as a result, Rebbe Lazar Kapar, it's not an issue for Rebbe Lazar Kapar either, because he doesn't hold of Rebbe Yehuda. So Amar Mar, Rebbe Shimon Omer. So now we go back and quote the Brisa, and we give us the full opinion of Rebbe Shimon. What did Rebbe Shimon say? It's clear from the context. And what was that context? Harehu Omer b'chiper al hakodesh mutumos. So again, you're atoning on the Kodesh. Or we'll say that the al here means regarding the Kodesh mitumos, from its tuma, from the tuma. So as a result, mituma so shel kodesh. It's specifically referring to some kind of tuma that applies to kodesh. And what is that tuma that applies to kodesh? Again, it is either the going into the Beit HaMikdash while Tameh, or it is eating Kodesh while Tameh, eating a sacrifice while Tameh. So Shapir Ka'amar Rabbi Shimon. 1 second. This is a great explanation. So why doesn't Rabbi Yehuda agree to it? So Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Lach, Rabbi Yehuda would say to you, Hahumi baile ki hechi de'avid livnei livnim. No, haki navid behechal. Now, what Rabbi Yehuda says is that the phrase v'chiper al hakodesh mitumot is saying not again, there we were originally saying al, it means in regard to or with respect to that the holy, the kodesh, meaning the kodesh and the Kodesh HaKodashim, or the Beit HaMikdash generally. But here, Rabbi Yehuda says that phrase doesn't mean that it's talking about the general place of the Beit HaMikdash, but rather it's talking about the Heichal, the Kodesh area, and it's saying that we have to atone in the Heichal, just as we do so in the Kodesh HaKodashim, meaning, as Rashi says, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 12 lines up in the narrow lines of Rashi on Chet Amud Aleph. Ki heichi de'avid lifnei v'lifnim, de'mefarish le'el b'minyana achas l'mala v'zayin lamata. That when it comes to sprinkling, where we do 1 up and 7 down from the midam apar, v'chein midam ha'seir, that we use both the bull from Yom Kippur and the goat from Yom Kippur, and we do that sprinkling up and down. V'asahai v'chiper al kodesh. So when it now says v'chiper al kodesh in the pasuk, it is telling us l'isuye heichal. It's telling us, you know what? That same sprinkling that you need to do up and down in the Kodesh HaKodashim, you also need to do it in the heichal, in the kodesh. Sheyasek ala parochas mi b'chutz. That towards the parochas, towards the curtain that separates the Kodesh and the Kodesh Kodashim, we need to also do that sprinkling, 1 up and 7 down, and that is what it is teaching. This phrase is teaching us. So in second, if that's what the phrase is teaching us, and we know that that's the halacha of Rabbi Shimon, where does Rabbi Shimon learn this same thing? Well, the pasuk also says, "Hahu mi v'chein yaseh nafka." That he'll learn that from the words v'chein yaseh that are also in Parak Tet Zayin, pasuk Tet Zayin. And so as a result, it's telling us also you do that. So the same thing that you do in the Kodesh HaKodashim, you're going to also do in the Kodesh. The Rebbe Yehuda, all right, well, now we know how Rebbe Shimon learns it. Why doesn't Rebbe Yehuda use the v'chein yaseh in the same way? So, if I were to only have those words of v'chein yaseh, haba mina, I might have thought, naisi par b'sa'ir achrina v'navid. I might have thought that you need to do another bull and goat. And that the idea is that just as you did a bull and goat in the Kodesh HaKodashim, so too you need to do a bull and goat and sprinkle their blood and sacrifice the animals and sprinkle their blood in the Kodesh. And it's separate animals. It's not necessarily the same animals. So Kamash Malan, so that's why we need to have both, according to Rebbe Yehuda. We need to both reference that you need to do the same thing, and we we have the words of V'chiper ala Kodesh to tell us, it's not just doing new animals, it's the same animals. The Rebbe Shimon, why doesn't Rebbe Shimon have that same requirement? V'chein yaseh lo moed minei mashma. No, I disagree with you. I would never have thought that you have to bring 2 new animals. V'chein yaseh lo moed, and you do the same for the tent of meeting, is saying from the same bull, from the same goat, you use that same blood. That's what you're supposed to do. And so Rabbi Shimon doesn't agree on the fundamental level with the read that Rabbi Yehuda has. And so as a result, that is the source of their distinction of the fact that they come up with 2 different ways to figure out what it is that this Seir LaHashem is coming to atone for on Yom Kippur. So Amar Mar, so now we know that it's coming for something that is we're continuing our going through the Brisa, and we know that it's coming to tell us about some kind of Tuma. And we have proposed that it's specifically about the Tuma of making the mikdash, going into the mikdash while you're tameh, or eating kodesh while you're tameh. And the question that the Gemara is now considering is maybe it's for all kinds of tuma violations, not just the ones that are in connection with the Beit HaMikdash and the kodesh. Yachal al kol tuma shebekodesh yehei seir zeh mechaper. So Talmud Lomar, mipishehem l'chol chatosam. No, it says from their rebellious sins among their transgressions. So, my nihu, what is it that we would think is a tuma that would result in this korban? And it's a tuma that's going to be with the kodesh. What tuma are we going to think is going to be this kind of tuma that is going to be subject to the atonement of the he-goat? And yet, because we say that we analogize the rebellious sins and the transgressions, that it's going to be excluded. So yesh ba yediyah b'tchila v'yesh ba yediyah v'sof. Maybe it's a situation that where we have knowledge in the beginning, meaning we knew we were tamei, then we either ate kodesh or entered the temple, and then we forgot about the fact that we were tamei, and then we knew about it at the end. So, but if that were the case, Hi bar karban who we know that that's subject to a karban olav yored. So why would we need the chatas? Why would we need the karban, the seir laHashem to address that? So lo tzricha. No, there is a situation where we might need that. Let's say close to sunset, you figure out on before Yom Kippur that you went into the Beis Hamikdash with such a sacrifice, and now you're about to have your judgment day, and you're not going to be able to offer the sacrifice because it's too late. So Salkadai de Gamina, I might have thought Adamaisi that until he brings his actual karban olav yored, which he'll bring after Yom Kippur, Nislele, maybe this, as we turn to Chedam Abet, maybe this goat to LaHashem, that is, we bring on Yom Kippur, so that will cause his punishment to be suspended. So Kamash Malan, that not so, that in fact, it is only these two that we're going to deal with and not anything else. Okay, so the only situations where the Korban LaHashem is going to the Korban LaHashem, the Seir LaHashem is going to cause atonement is where you knew at the beginning you were Tameh and you don't know now that you were Tameh and you did something wrong. So you did something wrong, but you don't know about it. So as a result, you can't bring a Korban because you don't even know that you did the thing wrong. But in that situation, that's where the Korban LaHashem will delay and suspend punishment. So Amar Mar minayin sheyesh ba yediyah betchila ve'ein ba yediyah besof shesair shel zed tola. So now going back and quoting again the Baraisa. So the Baraisa said, and I'm sorry for not scrolling. So the Baraisa said that how do I know that it's talking about where you knew in the beginning and not at the end? This is the very end of the Brisa. So the end of the Brisa says, so we say that it's because, so minayin. So in second, what do you mean? Where did you know? My kakashile. What was it? What was the question that we had? So hachika kashile. This was what was troubling the Tana of the Brisa. Hashta de amrat chatayim dumya dipshayim. Once we said that we're talking about a sin where the sin offer, where we're dealing with a situation where it's a similar to a rebellious sin, and mapshaim delav b'nei korban achatayim nami delav b'nei korban, that we're dealing with a situation where in both cases where we got to have some kind of sin, where just like in an affirmative sin, a sin intentionally done, you don't bring a korban. So too, the sin that we're talking about must be a sin where if you do it accidentally, you also don't bring a korban. So ema mapshaim delav b'nei korban la'olam. Maybe when it says that it has to be a sin where you don't bring a korban, maybe it means that it's a sin that you don't bring a korban ever. Because remember, if when it comes to a person who knew that they were tamei and now doesn't know that they're tamei, if eventually they know that they're tamei in the future, they do bring a sin offering. It's a korban olav yored that they'll bring. And so I might have thought that that when we say in this brisa that we're talking about a sin where you don't bring a korban, a sin offering, maybe it's talking about a sin where you don't bring a sin offering ever. And what would that be? So achatam delav b'nei korban la'olam. Maybe it should be a sin where you never would be bringing a sin offering. And my ninhu, what would that be? Ein ba yediyah b'tchila, v'yesh ba yediyah b'sof. If you didn't know that you were subject, that you had become tamei, and so you walk through a field and you then on your way into the Beis Hamikdash, and you thought everything was fine. You had just gone to the mikvah, everything was wonderful, and you go into the Beis Hamikdash, and then when you come out, it turns out that somebody says, you walked through that field? Oh, I'm so sorry. We had a burial in that field this morning. You walked over a grave, and so you were tamei meis. So in that situation, there's no korban because you didn't know. There's no chatas because you didn't know you were tamei and then forget about it. You didn't know about it in the first place. So there's no sacrifice. So maybe that's the situation that we should say the Seir LaHashem is covering. So, abal yesh ba yediyah b'tchila ve'ein ba yediyah b'sof, but where you knew originally and you didn't know now, kevan dechi misyadele bar korban, who since if you were to eventually know you would be subject to being a korban, ema lo lisli, maybe we don't suspend punishment through the goat of Yom Kippur. V'chi tema, and if you say, maybe that in fact, we shouldn't say that because ein ba yediyah b'tchila v'yesh ba yediyah b'sof seir hanasa b'chutz v'yom kippurim mechaper. But 1 second, our Mishnah told us that when it comes to the situation where you didn't know you were tamei, and then you went and went into the kodesh, or you ate kodesh, then it is the third goat that is the third sacrifice on Yom Kippur that is going to atone for you. It's the goat where the blood is only sprinkled outside on the altar, on the outer altar, and it's Yom Kippur together with Yom Kippur. Those two things will create the atonement. So, of course, that can't be what is talking about when we talk about the inner he-goat, the Seir LaHashem. No, not necessarily, because maybe we should switch them around. Maybe it should be that the inner altar sacrifice, the Seir LaHashem, is the one that atones where you didn't know in the beginning, but you knew at the end, and the outer altar Seir is the one that suspends for when you knew in the beginning and you didn't know now, and you don't know, and so as a result, maybe we can reverse them. So Amrakra l'chol chatosam. No, the Torah says for all their chataos. Miklal de b'nei chataos ninhu. No, the fact that it says l'chol chatosam and not mikol chatosam. So as a result, we're going to say that means that it's got to be at some point subject to a chatas. And so as a result, the situation where you're not subject to a chatas now, but could in the future be subject to a chatas, is where you knew you were tamei, and then you stopped knowing that you were tamei, you forgot that you were tamei, and you went into the Beis Hamikdash, or you ate kodesh, and so that's what the sacrifice is going to deal with for the Karban LaHashem. V'niskaper kapara gemura. All right, so fine. So now, why not just let the guy be atoned for completely? Why bother with some kind of suspension? Why not just say that if Yom Kippur comes, the guy doesn't know. He doesn't know. Let him just be fully atoned for. Why just suspend? So, iksiv mechatosam kidaka amrit. Now, if it had said mechatosam, that we're going to fully kind of, that from their inadvertent transgressions, I might have said exactly what you're saying. But now, since it says for all their sins, again implying that they're going to eventually have a sin offering that's going to come, It's the point is that there will eventually be a sin offering. Sorry. So all right. So now what is this whole suspension doing? So two potential answers for what the whole suspension is doing. So Amar Rebbe Zera, answer number one, Lomar she'im mace below avan. No, the point is that if the person knew that they were tamei and then forgot and went into the Beis Hamikdash or ate kodesh, and now a Yom Kippur has passed, and so the sacrifices of Yom Kippur have been made, and now he dies, in Cheshvan, and so as a result, we should know, his family should know that, you know what, he died as a pure person. That even though now it gets discovered that he really went into the Beis Hamikdash and never had the chance to offer a sin offering. No, the Seir LaHashem on Yom Kippur is sufficient, and he dies not as a sinner. So Amar Le Rava says, I don't like that answer. The Imes, if he dies, Misa Memarekes, the death itself eliminates all the sin. As Rashi says, 1, 2, 3, it's from the top of the narrow lines in Rashi on Chedem Abet, 8 lines, 7 and 8 lines down, Misa Mimareket, that Misa causes, cleanses. This is what we say at the end of Maseches Yoma, Daf Pei Vav and Mid Aleph. Shemisa Mimareket l'chol havonot she'asa tshuva aleihen. That if somebody were to die and you had done tshuva, meaning you are sorry about it, then you get full atonement. V'ein tshuva gomeres kaparasan. But for any kind of sin where tshuva alone does not complete the atonement. Below Yom Kippurim gomer kaparatan, and Yom Kippur doesn't complete the atonement. Could go on averot chamurot. So significant sins like going into the Beit Hamikdash or eating kodesh while you're tamei. So those sins, if you regret doing them, if you so then we're going to say that the death itself is sufficient to cause atonement. So Ella Amarava lahagain alav min hayisurin. Now, so what the point is? What's the point of trying to have some kind of suspension of punishment or suspension subject to bringing an eventual korban chatas? The suspension is of any punishment in the meantime. That the fact that we offer the Seir LaHashem, that allows us to say, you know what? We offer the Seir LaHashem. This person is not subject to any punishment, and Hashem should not bring any afflictions on this person as an atonement for this sin, because he has achieved the suspension of any kind of punishment. It's been tola for him because of the Seir LaHashem on Yom Kippur. Okay, so we are now at the 2 dots on Chet Amabet. This takes us back to our original Mishnah, and actually will now lead us perfectly into the next line of the Mishnah, because the next line of the Mishnah is going to talk about the situation where you aren't aware that you were tamei, and then you become aware that you were tamei, where we say it's the outer goat on Yom Kippur that is that is the outer goat on Yom Kippur that provides atonement. So we're going to see that we're going to be discussing that specific case, God willing, tomorrow. So stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Just to be aware, tomorrow's daf is at 10 p.m., a little later than 45 minutes after Shabbos. So, Ellie will be leading that, God willing, tomorrow. Have a wonderful day. Have a very good Shabbos. Looking forward to continuing our learning next week.